Hello, and then welcome to the last segment of your reading homework. So the segment starts on page 131, it goes to 140. So page 131. Gang 104 was right at the end of the line, and they formed up there. Shukov saw most of them had nothing in their hands. They'd been so busy they hadn't picked up any pieces of wood. The crazy bastards. Only two of them had small bundles. It was the same game every day. Before the signal to knock off, the men picked up the scraps of wood, sticks, and broken glass and tied them up with a piece of rag or worn-out tape to take back to camp. First, they frisked you for it by the guard room coming out, either the work supervisor or a foreman. If one of them was standing there, they told you to throw it on the ground. They had already sent millions of rubles up the chimney, and they thought they could make up for it with these splinters of wood. What the prisoners figured out was if every man from every gang brought just one little piece back with him, it'd be that much warmer in the barracks. Because the orderlies only brought in 10 pounds of coal dust for each stove, and you didn't get much warmth from that. So what they did was break these pieces up or saw them short as they could and stick them under their coats to get past the supervisor. The escort guards never told you to throw this firewood down out here on the site. They needed firewood too, but they couldn't carry it themselves. For one another, they weren't supposed to in uniform, and for another, they were holding their Tommy guns with both hands to shoot at the prisoners if they had to. But once they got them back to camp, it was a different story, and they gave the order, row such and such to row such and such, drop your wood here. But they had a heart. They had to leave some of the wardens and even some of the prisoners, or they'd be nothing at all for anybody. So what happened was every prisoner carried wood every day, but you never knew if you'd get it through or when they'd take it away from you. At that same time, Shukov was looking around the place to see if there was anything to pick up. The boss counted them all and said to the chief escort, 104 all here. Cesar left the fellows in the office too and came over. You could see the red light from the pipe he was puffing away at, and his mustache was all white with frost. He asked the captain, well, how are things, Captain? A guy who's warm doesn't know what it's like to be frozen, or he wouldn't ask stupid questions like that. The captain shrugged his shoulders and said, how are things, you say? Well, I've broken my back with work, and I can hardly stand up straight. What he wanted to say was, don't you see I want to smoke? And Caesar gave him tobacco too. The captain was the only man in the gang he tried to stay friends with. There was nobody else around he could have a heart-to-heart talk with now and then. Now everyone started shouting, man missing in 32, in 32. The assistant gang boss from 32 and another fellow shot off to look in the repair shop. The men in the crowd were asking who it was and what it was all about. Shukov heard it was that short, dark Moldavian. Which of them did they mean? The one they said was a Romanian spy, a real one? There were 5 spies in every gang, but it was all phony. It said they were spies in their records, but it was just that they'd been pals. Shukov was that kind of spy, but the Moldavian was a real one. The chief of the escort looked at the list and his face turned black. If the spy had gotten away, he'd be in for it. Shukov and the whole crowd got mad too. Who did he think he was, this goddamn skunk, the son of the blank bastard? It was dark already and the moon was up. The stars were out, and the night cold was getting fiercer. And now this son of a blank had to go and get lost. Was the working day too short for him? The blank with only 11 hours from dawn to sundown? Maybe the judge would give him a little more. Even Shukov thought it was funny for somebody to go on working like that and not hear the signal to knock off. He had clean forgot how he kept on working himself a little while back and had gotten mad because people were going over to the guard room too early. But now he was standing there freezing and bitching along with the others, and that Moldavian kept them hanging around here another half hour, he thought, and the escorts handed him over to the crowd. They'd tear the blank bastard to pieces like wolves. The cold was getting into them now. Nobody could stand still. They stomped their feet on the ground or edged back and forth. Some guys were asking if the Moldavian could have gotten away. If he'd beat it in the daytime, it was one thing, but if he was hiding out now and waiting for the guards to leave the watchtowers, he had another guess coming. They'd never leave without him. If there was no mark under the wires to show where he'd gotten away, they'd searched the compound for 3 days and kept the fellows up there on the watchtower till they found him. For a whole week if need be. There was the rule, and every old camp hand knew it. If anybody got out, it was hell on the guards, and they were kept on the go without food or sleep. It made them so mad they often didn't bring the fellow back alive. Caesar was telling the captain, well, you remember that scene with those eyeglasses hanging up there on their rigs, don't you? Yes, the captain said. He was smoking Caesar's tobacco. Or the scene with that baby carriage coming slowly down the steps. But it gives you a cockeyed eye of life in the Navy. But the trouble is, we're rather spoiled by modern close-up techniques. Yes, those maggots crawling in the meat were as big as earthworms. They couldn't really have been that size, could they? But you can't do that sort of thing small scale on film. If they brought that kind of meat to the camp, I tell you, and put it on the cauldron instead of that rotten fish we get, I'd bet we'd. The prisoner started screaming, Yeah! There were three shapes coming out of the repair shop, so he'd gotten the Moldavian. Ugh! The crowds at the gates booed, and when they got a little closer, Bastard, Croc, Shithead, no good son of a blank, and Shukov joined in too. It was no joke robbing 500 men of half an hour. The Moldavian came out with his head hanging down, and he looked smaller than a mouse. Halt, one of the guards shouted and started writing in his book. K406, where have you been? The sergeant came over to him, and he was twisting the butt of his rifle. Some of the crowd went on yelling, Craphead, son of a blank, stinking bastard, but some shut up when they saw the sergeant toying with his rifle. The Moldavian stood there with his head down and said nothing. He sort of backed away from the guard. The assistant boss of 32 came up and said, The bastard was up there on the scaffold for the plasterers. He went up there to get away from me, and he got warm and fell asleep. And he rammed his fist into the backs of the fellow's neck. He'd let him have it real good. That was just to get clear of the guard. The Moldavian staggered, and Hungarian from 32 shot over and kicked him in the ass. This was a lot tougher than spying. Any fool can be a spy. Spying was all right. It was a nice clean game and real fun, not like slaving away in a penal camp for 10 years. The guard lowered his rifle, and the chief of the escort bawled out, Get away from those gates, line up by fives. So they were going to do another count, the dirty dogs. What was the point of making another count? Everything was clear as it was. The prisoners groaned. They forgot about the Moldavian now, and all their hate turned on the escorts. They wouldn't back away from the gates. What's all this about? The chief escort screamed. Do you want to sit on your asses in the snow? That's where I'll put you if you like, and that's where I'll keep you till morning. And he sure would. He wouldn't think twice about it if he wanted. It would happen plenty of times before, and sometimes they had to go down on their knees with the prisoners pointing their guns at the ready. The prisoners knew all about that sort of thing, so they started backing away from the gates. Get back, the guard shouted to get them moving quicker. Yeah, when you're bunching up at the gates like that, bastards, the fellows at the back shouted. They were sore at the ones up front, so what else could they do? Line up by fives. The moon was really shining bright. It wasn't purple anymore, and it was way up by now. They'd lost their evening. That damn Moldavian, those damn guards, what a rotten, lousy life. The fellows up front were standing on their toes and looking back to see who'd been missed in the count, and the last row had 2 or 3. Right now, their lives depended on it. It looked to Shukov like there were 4 fellows in the back row. He got limp all over. He was so scared. Now there was 1 too many, so they'd start the count from scratch again. It was that scavenger Futikov who had gotten out of his own line of 5 to scrounge the butt of the captain's cigarette and didn't get back in time. So that's why he was there, looking sort of out of place. The second in charge of the escort gave him a clout on the neck. It was the best thing he ever did in his life. And now there were only 3 men back there. The number was right now, thank God. Get away from the gates, the guards yelled again. But the men didn't grumble this time. They could see the soldiers coming out of the guard room on the other side of the gate and ringing off the ground outside, which meant they were getting ready to let them through. There was no sign of the work supervisor or his foreman. They were free workers, so they might get their firewood through this check. They opened the gates wide, and the chief escort was standing outside by the wooden railings with another fellow who had to double-check. First, second, third, he yelled. If the count came out right this time, they'd take the sentries off the watchtowers. They had a hell of a long way to walk back over the compound from those towers, and they didn't phone to tell them to come down till the last prisoner was out. If you got an escort chief with any brains, he'd start marching you back to the camp right away, because he knew the prisoners couldn't make a run for it now, and the fellows from the watchtowers could catch up with them. But if the chief on duty was a dope, he always waited because he was scared he wouldn't have enough men to deal with the prisoners. Today's guy was that kind of blockhead, and he waited. The prisoners had been out in the cold all day, and they were so frozen they were ready to drop. They'd been waiting around like this a whole hour now, but it wasn't so much the cold that got them. What really made them sore was the thought of that lost evening. There'd be no time for all those things they wanted to do back at camp. Somebody was asking the captain in the row next to Shukov, "How come you know so much about the British Navy?" "Well, you see, I spent a whole month almost on a British cruiser, had a cabin to myself there. I was on convoys as a liaison officer. Then after the war, some British admiral, who should have had more sense, sent me a little souvenir with an inscription that said, 'In gratitude.' I was really shocked, and I cursed like hell, so now I'm inside with all the others. It's not much fun sitting here with this Bendera bunch." It looked sort of eerie all over with the bare plain, the empty compound, and the moon gleaming on the snow. The guards had already gotten in place, 10 paces away from each other, and their guns at the ready. There was this black herd of prisoners, and in them, in a black coat like everybody else, was that man, S311, who'd worn golden shoulder straps in his time and in pals with a British admiral. And now he had to carry Hawes with Fitikov. There's nothing you can't do to a man. The escort was all ready, and they skipped the sermon this time. Forward, march, and make it snappy. The hell they'd make it snappy. They didn't stand a chance of beating the other columns of camp, so they sure weren't in any hurry. All right, guys, that concludes your reading homework. Don't forget to do your annotations. God bless you, and have a great day.